Can we?
Hello and welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the globe. Now, as Donald Trump signals a return to America First policies, global alliances are on edge, from NATO and European security to trade wars and Indo-Pacific partnerships. Washington's foreign policy direction is once again in flux. At the same time, Trump's renewed interest in Greenland has spotlighted the Arctic as a new geopolitical flashpoint, where climate change, resource competition, and great power rivalry between the US, China, and Europe are now colliding. To discuss this ongoing situation, joining us now is Klaus Dodds, a leading geopolitical writer and public speaker. He's currently interim faculty dean for science and technology at Middlesex University London and a professor of geopolitics there. Professor Dodds has previously served as executive dean at Royal Holloway University of London and as a visiting professor at the College of Europe in Warsaw. He's also a former editor of the Geographical Journal and former editor-in-chief of Territory Politics Governance. Thank you very much for joining us, Klaus. It's a pleasure to talk to you here on the programme.
Thank you for the invitation.
Pleasure. Let's get straight into this. Of course, it's been a big day in the geopolitical sphere. Professor Dodds, has Donald Trump's America First approach fundamentally weakened NATO's credibility, and is the US still the unquestioned leader of the Western alliance?
Thank you. That's a really important question, or even set of questions. I mean, I think Donald Trump, unfortunately, in the last 12 months, has done enormous damage, wittingly or unwittingly, to the NATO alliance. And I'm sorry to say that if you were seeking to make President Putin's task easier, then the last 12 months have unquestionably aided and abetted. You cannot expect to threaten the territorial integrity of two very close allies, Denmark and Canada, and then think that won't do enormous damage to trust and goodwill. So I think there's really a big question mark over the future of NATO, even if we were able to resolve in some sort of way the Greenland saga. I think the other thing that I would say as a sort of an associated observation is that henceforth the United States will no longer be considered a reliable security and trading party. And I think it is enormously significant that Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada arguably gave the best speech in Davos and had come to Davos after traveling to China and Qatar. And I think the contrast was stark in terms of who you can do business with.
Indeed. Of course, this Greenland issue has been at the top of every news bulletin around the world. And do you think that Donald Trump's fixation on acquiring Greenland, does it signal a shift towards resource-driven power, given, of course, Venezuela, of course, that we've seen earlier on in the year? And what risks does this pose to regional stability and climate security?
I think there's no question whatsoever that Donald Trump has little to no interest in climate change. So this is first and foremost about Western hemispheric dominance, and the national security strategy released by the United States does not pull its punches. So Greenland and Venezuela and Canada and the Panama Canal are all part and parcel of this ruthless pursuit of Western hemispheric dominance. Resources clearly matter. We know Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves, and Greenland, of course, is widely seen as a rare earth critical minerals hotspot. I think also, and I've said this several times now in various publications, this is as much about ego politics as it is geopolitics. And I do think there is something very interesting about this president who seems determined to make America great again, and that appears to involve making America larger.
And do you think Donald Trump's America First agenda could undermine this cooperative Arctic governance, perhaps accelerate a resource scramble in Greenland and open the door for China to expand its influence in the high north?
I think, to be fair to President Trump, we can't blame him for everything. So it is important to say that if Arctic circumpolar collaboration was fracturing, then I think we really ought to point the finger of blame at President Putin. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine followed, of course, by a suite of other events, such as the annexation of Crimea in 2014, just, I'm afraid, collaborated, or contributed rather, excuse me, to a culture of complete mistrust and diplomatic breakdown. What Donald Trump has done has to compound that still further. And remember, when the West imposed sanctions on Russia, Russia turned to China, India, and others to continue to do business. And what we saw was the Arctic fracturing between a sort of Russian-Asian Arctic and a Euro-American Arctic. That was 2022, arguably actually probably a bit earlier given the imposition of sanctions. But my point is, by 2024, 2025, the European-American Arctic, if I can put it like that, had also fractured because of Trump's obsession with Greenland and Canada. So what I'm, in essence, concluding, unfortunately, is that the Arctic is now separated into three elements, and China has long established itself as a great polar power in both the Arctic and the Antarctic.
And Klaus, of course, staying in Davos, following that speech by Donald Trump, it seemed there was a huge sigh of relief around the room when he said he wasn't going to claim the world's largest island by force. But the Danish foreign minister was quick, and he ran to the press cameras outside, and he said that Donald Trump's aims do still remain the same, that he does indeed still want to acquire the country, the self-autonomous territory of Denmark, of course. What do you think Donald Trump was aiming for here? What positives do you think he got about not denying that he was going to possibly use force when it came to Greenland? And do you think he's got the result he wanted?
Yeah, it's a really good question, isn't it? Because, you know, if you sort of cast your mind back to Donald Trump as real estate developer, Donald Trump as the author of The Art of the Deal, one of the things that Trump has done in the past is to make exaggerated demands and then to back down and actually then present whatever he's come away with as a decisive victory. So I think what we've got here is ultimately a face-saving exit strategy. In other words, Trump can tell his political base, look, I acquired a bit of Greenland for national security purposes, but, and this is the big but, what you witnessed from Denmark in particular was a recognition that this issue is not going to go away. I don't think Trump's obsession with Greenland is diminished as a consequence of this apparent agreement that the United States gets some kind of sovereign base area allocation to enable it to construct its hemispheric security infrastructure.
Indeed, and in wider US strategy, how might Trump's tariffs, trade wars, remake Indo-Pacific alliances, European alliances in the long term? Some people are saying that the damage that Donald Trump is making to these alliances, some of which have lasted decades, are beyond repair now.
Yeah, again, it's a really intriguing issue in terms of what is both the short and long-term impact. So,
Mm.
again, if I go back to the Carney trip to China and Qatar, what was interesting there, and Carney's speech picks this up explicitly, you're going to have a series of so-called middle powers. And that might be Canada, Australia, that might be the United Kingdom, for example, having to think very carefully now about what kind of relationships and strategic partnerships are going to be pursued. So the United Kingdom has a terrific dilemma on its hands with a huge tech deal that may or may not be signed by the United States. Our financial sector is very entangled in the United States. Europe holds trillions of dollars of US debt in various forms. So disentangling from the United States is not straightforward. I think it is interesting when suddenly China is presented with an opportunity to look like the reliable, stable partner that isn't going to threaten the territorial integrity of other states. I mean, China has, of course, its Taiwan focus, but you can see from China's point of view, Trump has provided further ammunition to present itself as a more responsible great power. And even India will also have to think carefully about those future alliances, whether it's with China, whether it's Russia, or the United States. The long and short of it is, Trump has appeared to declare conclusively that the United States' role in underpinning the rules-based international order that we thought was created in the aftermath of 1945 is over. And that means we face a world possibly where Donald Trump thinks that great powers have spheres of domination. Some regional powers will be able to establish their own spheres of domination and influence. And his Board of Peace idea looks like a sort of new world order where 10 or 12 influential states do their business with one another, mainly through summit diplomacy, and we don't waste our time with international legal frameworks.
Klaus, just quickly, do you think the United States has any allies left in the traditional sense? Of course, allies, the United Kingdom, have been threatened with tariffs. Has the United States got any people that they won't threaten in the way that they do now?
It's really interesting. I think the United States has one very special relationship, and that's with the State of Israel. And I've thought for a very long time the US-Israel relationship is genuinely the exceptional one. The relationship with the United Kingdom, that's a classic senior-junior partner relationship. I never saw it as that special. Israel is different. I think the other relationships that Donald Trump clearly is very invested in is what I would describe as the sort of the petro-monarchies of the Middle East. I think those relationships matter. And this president as well is very good at blurring and blending the personal, the political, and the business dimension of life in general. So I think there's also something very, very interesting about how the Trump family, the Trump administration weave, if you like, their interests in and out of one another. But in short, I think the number of friends and allies of the United States has taken a bit of a beating over the last 12 months. And I'm afraid European states and Canada will not forgive and forget the last 12 months straightforwardly.
And Klaus, finally, of course, we've just listened to President Zelensky of Ukraine speak at the World Economic Forum. He said that Europe needs to stand stronger, can't be led by the United States, needs to start making decisions by itself. Do you see that happening anytime soon?
This is the perennial challenge for Europe in general, is whether Europe can really develop what in Brussels is termed strategic autonomy. And I think Ukraine has been a real stress test now for the last 3 or 4 years. And the truth of the matter is this war has been prolonged, not least because of Russian belligerence. It's true, and really outstanding Ukrainian defense, but because of the prevarication of the Trump administration that clearly, I think, could have played a more decisive role to bring hostilities to an end. My concern all along has been is that Ukraine has to become a plaything for US-Russian relations. And what's being lost here, and I really feel for President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine, is that they just become collateral damage in all of this. But a settlement needs to be found, and Europeans know whatever happens in the coming weeks and months, they have got to establish a collective defensive capability and, frankly, deterrence capability as well in the face of a Russia that will, I'm afraid, continue to think of itself in conflict with Europe.
Klaus Dodds, thank you very much for taking the time in joining us. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you.
Well, that's all that we've got time for on this episode of Focal Length. For more international news and updates, stay tuned on NewsX World.